All right, so I was watching Max Tutoring video 19, and Elliot got to the point where he was going to offer some criticism of this paper. Oh, there's the paper that Max and another gentleman wrote a few years ago. And he was starting with the abstract, and he said that there's a flaw in the first sentence. And so I figured I would start recording and try and follow along and compare notes, as it were. So I think the flaw is that there's a missing word. So let's read through it. This paper identifies fundamental flaws in our democratic systems and explains that while they were useful previously, by the way, this is a minor point. This is not my main point. Well, let me just finish reading first before I get sidetracked on like 50 tangents. So, while they were useful previously, no longer serve their purpose and need to be replaced. So, I think the issue is that there should be a they here, and we can see. So I think the basic structure is paper identifies flaws. Talking about like the core grammatical structure. This is a big prepositional phrase. Let me just try doing it this way. So I've crossed out some of the stuff that I think is sort of grammatically inessential. So paper identifies flaws. Subject, verb, object, right? And this is, I'm going to wind up doing a mind map, but I'm just saying it in words at first. So this and is basically giving paper two verbs. Paper identifies and paper explains. Now the paper identified flaws, and there's some parallelism in that the paper explains something. The structure is more complicated though after this verb, so it's not like the sentences the paper identifies flaws and explains errors in democracy, period. Because that would be pretty similar. It's kind of overloaded. I mean, I guess there is this whole part, but this is a prepositional phrase, so it doesn't play a role in like the core and the analysis of the core structure of the sentence, whereas this situation is more complicated here, significantly more complicated. So let me do a mind map tree. All right, so this is a bit of a lazy tree because I'm not putting all the stuff in here, but it gets some of the essence, 1828 dictionary stuff, and how to think about that. The way I'm thinking about it. Okay, let me back up. So there's a they missing, and the they is very essential because it's essentially, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you could think about it, but it's essentially the subject for two verbs, serve and need. So they no longer serve their purpose and they need to be replaced. And you could think about it in a couple ways, because you could say, well, maybe there's one they missing, or maybe there's two. Maybe you could write the they twice, but I think it's fine to just have it once, and I think that would be my general inclination. I wanted to pull up this tree stuff from some educational materials Elliot made, because I specifically wanted to see how he organized how he treated that. So in this case, I think that school is boring. He says that there's an implied and. All right, I think I've got something I'm satisfied with. This is really complex. And this isn't even all, like, I left out some of the details, but you could see how complex the grammatical structure is. And with this level of complexity, of course, there's going to be a mistake, you know? So let me just confirm that Elliot agrees that I've identified the error.
First sentence individually, I think there's a flaw in that.
Okay. So yeah, so I'm not certain about the comma. I'll come back to that. But and explains that while they were useful previously, no laced. This feels not grammatical in some way now.
Yep.
So the first half of, like, before the end, I feel like it's fine. But after the end, what does that mean?
Oh yeah, there was another issue that I had an intuition about, but I just wound up focusing on the they, because I think the they is a big issue. But this paper identifies fundamental flaws in our current democratic systems and explains that while they were previously useful, the they is intending to support or intending to connect back to democratic systems, but the systems are the object of a prepositional phrase, which is less grammatically sort of critical or central. So from a grammatical perspective, what you would want to be talking about here ideally is the flaws, because those are the, like, that would be fine to be talking about the object. Another thing you could do, you could like break things up into multiple sentences, like this paper identifies fundamental flaws in our democratic systems. It explains that these systems were useful previously, but no longer serve their purpose. Something like that. Or you could even do it in one sentence. You just reintroduce the thing that you want to be talking about right now. This paper identifies fundamental flaws in our democratic systems and explain that while these systems were useful previously, they no longer serve their purpose. But it's just, yeah, it's not a huge point, but it's like the missing they is just straight wrong, whereas the thing that I was just talking about, what the they is pointing to is more like bad form. So let's see.
Okay. All right. So first error I can see is, so the they there is meant to refer to the democratic systems, but it refers to flaws because the democratic systems are in the prepositional phrase and the subject is.
Yeah, there aren't hard rules on reference. Like I wouldn't call it 100% strictly wrong. It's just like you're referring to something that's in a less standard place, and people have to figure it out from context, and it's harder than usual.
Yeah.
All right, got that one.
So I feel like if something's like harder than usual and there's a better way to do it, then that's
Yeah.
a reasonably good reason to say that it's wrong. Maybe not in a strict sense.
I just
but
meant it doesn't
definitely
like directly violate a rule of grammar. So there's like different types of errors. Like it's poor writing as opposed to, a sentence fragment.
Yeah, okay. So it's not necessarily ungrammatical, but it's definitely unclear. So it'd be something like those systems instead. Now, this, I don't know off the top of my head how to tell if this second part now is grammatical or not.
Okay.
No, I would need to
So-
have another comma or something.
Yeah. Well, what's the parent of this part at the end?
So I'm not sure because I think there's either words missing or punctuation missing.
Yep. So if it's hard to tell what the parent is, you've got a problem. Making the tree is one of the ways you could find the options for what the parent might be and try to figure out if none of them work and what words might be missing.
Yeah, so I would in this case, I go with the tree that I think the author meant to put there. So like no longer serve their purpose. So there is referring to something, those systems. So, I mean, my intuition is that like this comma, if we added another comma somewhere, we need to rephrase some stuff, but then it would make more sense.
So what is no longer serve their purpose supposed to be modifying or referring to?
The systems.
Yeah. If we had the systems here, it would work better. There's a parallelism issue because here we have the noun, and then here the noun is omitted. So
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to sort of parse. While they were useful previously is, I feel like is best as a parenthetical because it's not the subject of the sentence. Like the sentence is not trying to make a point about that, or the clause, and we can omit it, and it really doesn't lose much. It explains that those systems no longer serve their purpose.
yeah, that's possible.
So I'm not sure if. So I have a habit.
I'm not really listening to that part.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to sort of parse. While they were useful previously is, I feel like is best as a parenthetical because it's not the subject of the sentence. Like the sentence is not trying to make a point about that, or the clause, and we can omit it, and it really doesn't lose much.
Yeah.
It explains that those systems no longer serve their purpose.
Yeah, that's possible.
So I'm not sure if. So I have a habit of using parentheticals. I don't know if it's how good or bad it is, sort of thing. Like obviously they're not always bad, but I do think they increase the mental load you need to actually parse the sentence.
Okay, so read just the highlighted part, and I think there's something interesting about it.
They were useful previously, no longer serve their purpose and need to be replaced.
So I think that is a complete and correct sentence by itself.
They were useful previously, no longer serve their purpose and need to be replaced. Is it?
Hey, that's interesting. Yeah. They were useful previously. By the way, before I forget this, because I tabled this point earlier, I think I'd put previously before useful. generally. They were previously useful. Minor aside. So yeah, they were useful previously, comma. That's like point one. No longer serve their purpose. That's point two. And need to be replaced. Point three. Yeah, that is a sentence. Huh.
I can
think
see
so.
they were useful previously. That can be sort of correct.
So it's they were, and then a list of three things. So it's they were useful previously, or no, it's just they.
Okay, yeah.
They and three things. They were useful previously, no longer serve their purpose, and they need to be replaced. So
Yeah,
there's parallelism on the they if you read it as a sentence by itself. And that might be where the error came from, because that fragment works by itself. It just doesn't work in context after the while.
yeah.
That's really interesting. Because, yeah, like I omitted the while clause from this for the sake of keeping it simple. But you can see, like, this is like a well-structured, like the form of it is well-structured. What happens is that the while sort of assigns the subject to the while clause, if that makes sense. Where's my? It says, like, the thing after the while is going to be the subject of this thing. And so, well, if you just tunnel focused on this, it makes sense. You've got, when you introduce the while, you've got a sort of a reassignment of the they. And so the whole thing falls apart. Huh. Interesting stuff. Very interesting.
I mean, so the while is, if we actually just omit the while, like n explains that they were useful previously, no longer serve their purpose, and need to be replaced.
Yep, that would
Yeah, you could just straight omit it.
make it come out all right.
I tend not to like lists of this sort of nature. I feel like don't read as easily for me. So I tend not to write them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's awkward to have a list like this when it isn't by itself, like chained after that, so it's part of a more complex sentence. I would not recommend it as a sentence by itself. It's just they X Y Z. I think is okay.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I could see it. Yeah, on its own, it makes a lot more sense. Provided that you take the like if you don't read it as a list, you only find out after the second element that it could be a list. So it's a bit difficult to like you sort of need to back read, or I need to at least in terms of my first reading of it.
Yeah,
Like when I get to that point, I'll be confused and then need to reparse it.
yeah. It can definitely cause having to go back, which is bad when you just
Yeah. Okay, well that was fruitful.